What is up, everybody? Welcome to Travis and Vic's Drunken Horror Adventures. I'm Travis. I am sober because I am actually driving at the moment. Leaving AMC Theaters, Louisville, Kentucky, Hurstbourne, Stony Brook, all that good shit. Driving a mom van, responsibilities and such. However, I am here to talk about a movie that has been just shit on by critics so far. And I feel like maybe this episode should have been titled Travis Battles the Critics, because here we go. So I just watched Venom at, again, my local AMC. I have A-List, as I've mentioned before. And the thing about A-List is that it affords me the opportunity to do things that I wouldn't have done otherwise. My IMAX ticket today would have cost me somewhere in the range of $14 just to go see a movie on a Thursday night, in IMAX, granted. But that's a hell of a lot of money just to go see a movie, in my opinion, especially in Louisville, Kentucky. I understand New York, California are a little different, but Jesus Christ. Cool thing is, I got a Venom comic book when I got there, so seeing it on opening night the way I did was nice, because I did get a comic book. And just a little background for me. Granted, this is like the first superhero movie or whatever the fuck you want to call it that we've talked about on this show. And it's just me, because this is not Vic's cup of tea. He likes Batman, and that's about it. I wanted to talk about this, just, give a little bit of thoughts on it on my own. Again, non-spoilers. But anyway, background on me. I like comic books. But as I say that, let me just put that in a certain way. I used to like comic books. I'm not so much into comic books anymore. I like the Marvel Cinematic Universe. I even like the DC movies a little bit. They aren't bad. I used to read Marvel, and the Marvel comic books that I enjoyed mostly were 60s, 70s, a little bit of 80s, and then you could throw in the Infinity Gauntlet. But most other comic books, other than that, the modern ones, the really recent ones, maybe even over the last 20 years, there's a lot of things I don't like about them. One of the things is the art. One of the things is, even though I love violence, if you listen to me on this show, you know I love violence. But the violence is just annoying in some of the comic books, at least the Marvel ones. It's like, this is kind of not what I grew up with. So, old man fighting against time thing. But Venom is kind of a in-between character for me, just like Deadpool. Venom came along in a time where, granted, I did like the comic book period when Venom came along, but I don't recall reading a lot of Venom comic books. A lot of my knowledge of Venom came, later on, from like the Spider-Man cartoon show, Spider-Man 3, video games, things like that. I'm not saying that I didn't read any comic books with Venom in them, because that's not true. I always liked Spider-Man, so obviously I know of Venom, and I know his backstory and all that shit, but if you're coming into a movie like this, you come in with a certain apprehension, I think. And not just because of the shitty Rotten Tomatoes score, because they gave it a fucking beatdown, like 29% on Rotten Tomatoes right now. No, you come into it as a comic book fan, or even a comic book movie fan, and you know that it's going to be different than the comics. And you can roll with the punches, or you can get nerd rage. And I am guilty of both. So I've been able to roll with the punches before, but I've also had nerd rage. It goes both ways for me. I had a lot of nerd rage over a movie like Iron Man 3. That movie pissed me off to my core. And I'm not even a huge Iron Man fan, but fuck, that movie just irritates me to no end. And I think that's the only Marvel Cinematic Universe movie that I just do not like. But this is not a Marvel Cinematic Universe movie. I want to make that point. I said that this was a Sony movie, but at the start it says Columbia. So very confused on that whole concept. I'm not sure how that works, if Sony leased it out, kind of like they did Spider-Man. But the point is, if you're doing a Venom movie without Spider-Man, you already know, and this is not a spoiler, so if you're upset that I just said that, well, you've been under a rock, because everybody knows that this is not a Spider-Man movie. Spider-Man is not in this. This is not involved Spider-Man. Spider-Man is basically leased out to Marvel Cinematic Universe right now. So anyway, you don't get the Spider-Man influence of this. There are some characters here or there that, you knew from Spider-Man comics or what have you. But this is a Venom story. Venom is, quote unquote, the hero here, or anti-hero, or vigilante, whatever you want to call him. And it's a weird place for Venom, because for me, much like Deadpool, Venom was always kind of a supporting character, not so much the main character, and certainly not the hero, as it were. And I got over it with Deadpool, and I enjoyed the first 2 Deadpool movies. I like the second one better than the first one. By the way, that's my shitty driving right now. If you hear the beeping, that just means I'm not in my fucking lane, but it's late, and I'm old and blind. So anyway, so take that out of it. I like Tom Hardy. So that was one of the things that got me excited about the movie in the first place, because I always felt like it was a little out of place to have Venom in his own movie, especially as not a sequel or any kind of connection to Spider-Man. That is the thing that I think people are going to have the hardest time getting over with this movie. So again, not a spoiler. If you paid attention to anything that came out about the movie, it's pretty well known. No Spider-Man connection, aside from, characters that are known. But you're not going to see, Tom Holland, or am I getting his fucking name right? I hope so. Anyway, or anybody associated with it. But if you know the Spider-Man universe or the Marvel universe, you know some of these characters. But this to me is more of an Eddie Brock story than a Venom story, which is no criticism on the movie, because halfway through it I was like, this is more of an Eddie Brock movie than it is Venom. And then I started thinking, yeah, but what are the other movies? I mean, Spider-Man's more of a Peter Parker movie. The Batman movies, for the most part, are Bruce Wayne movies. So it makes sense that this would be about the person who Venom is associated with, the host, because it's a setup for things to come. And I hope that the viewing audience does not go with the critic scores on this. Everybody in the theater seemed to be happy when it was over, me included, myself included. I enjoyed the movie. Is it a cinematic masterpiece? Absolutely not. But who the hell expects that with a movie about Venom? Venom's a little bit of a strange character on his own, It's kind of like Hulk. Hulk's never going to get a cinematic masterpiece. So you either enjoy it for what it is or you don't. And I have a feeling that comic book nerds, and, I've been guilty of that label myself, so maybe that's not a knock, maybe it is, are going to have a lot of issues with this movie. But I feel like, and this is coming from somebody that's enjoyed comic books over many years, 36 years. I've enjoyed a lot of comic books. I don't have an issue with this movie. Do I prefer the Spider-Man connection as opposed to Venom just kind of doing his own thing, getting the symbiote, or Eddie Brock getting the symbiote without the Spider-Man influence? Of course I prefer Spider-Man. Spider-Man's a great character, always has been, and so it's strange to have Venom without Spider-Man, but that doesn't make this movie lesser because of it. If you didn't ever know that Spider-Man was connected to Venom, I think you could go into this movie and really enjoy it. And that's kind of how I tried to treat it, because if I started sitting there and overanalyzing and say, well, in the comics it was this way, or, that's not how that happened, and that type of thing, I wasn't going to have a good time. So there was no point in even seeing the movie at that point. But I went in, eyes open, realizing what I was watching. I was realizing that this is a studio trying to make money, and they've been pushing for a Venom movie for a long time. Whether I agree or disagree with it, I prefer to support comic book movies unless I think it looks like absolute shit. There's only 1 or 2 examples. No, I'll give you 3 examples of comic book movies that I have never seen. The new Fantastic Four, and it sounds like I was right to never see that. I just have never seen it, and I have no regrets in not seeing it. They did too many things there, took too many liberties, and I saw the previews, and I was like, nope, fuck that. and apparently I was right to be that way. The others, and I didn't actively avoid these other two, I just never really watched them because I didn't care. Catwoman, don't get me wrong, Halle Berry, hot, but if you want to see Halle Berry naked, why not watch movies like that? I mean, there's a couple out there. So, no sense in watching Catwoman when you've got the ability to watch her and nothing. So, no, I'm good, and I don't really regret never watching Catwoman. The other one that I have never watched is Elektra, and that's another one that got shit on by everybody, and I don't think I would enjoy that either, because quite frankly, I just don't care about Elektra that much. She's cool in the Daredevil TV show, but I digress. I am going way off course now, so let's get back to Venom. It was a fun movie. Tom Hardy was cool. There was some good comedy in this. Want to say that the reason why it made sense for me to do this on this show instead of just talking about it randomly on one of our other shows is that this movie was originally labeled as a horror movie, and at one point they were even talking about an R rating. Then in recent months, there was this delight that they got a PG-13. So things changed over time, and I assume they just didn't want to go the way of Deadpool, which is fine. Deadpool is its own animal, and it's cool to have an R-rated comic book movie, but Venom didn't necessarily need to be that way, and I was okay with that. So that's no knock on it. It's just interesting to me to see how the movie evolved over time before it was actually released. So those are kind of the pluses. The minuses are mostly the fact that, the nerd rage stuff, and there's more Eddie Brock than there is Venom, but I think that's kind of common for comic book movies. I really don't know why I'm even thinking about that, but I tell you, some of the shit that Venom was doing in this movie was really cool, because it feels like I've never really seen it on the big screen. I know I've seen Spider-Man 3, but it's like, I don't know, this felt more true to what Venom is. Maybe not the story of Venom, but the character I felt like was pretty good. But again, I am not the biggest comic book nerd there is. I just like comics. So it's one of those things. I mean, I like comic book characters too. Anyway, my thoughts on it again are positive. Definitely a thumbs up type of movie. On this show, we always give, either a chainsaw rating for Vic or a machete rating for me, because I'm a Friday the 13th guy. Blake, when he comes on, he gives Freddy Glove ratings, and then Jer, when he comes on, he gives Sledgehammer ratings. A little bit of a chainsaw influence there for him too. But for me, since I give the machete ratings and I'm the only one on the show, you'll get one rating today. And I would give this, I feel like I've done this a lot lately, I would give it a high 3 out of 4 machetes. It's certainly not the best comic book movie or Marvel movie. I know it's not Marvel Cinematic Universe, I just mean Marvel in general. But it's not the worst either. It's somewhere in the middle. But it's enjoyable. That's what's important. It's enjoyable, it's entertaining, and it's just fucking fun. It's just fun. I mean, if you're going in expecting some, intelligent movie, you're not going to get that from this movie. This was just balls to the wall, action, a little bit of horror, some comedy, and it was just fun. It's better than the Ghost Rider movies. It's better than the first Daredevil movie. Better than a couple of the Spider-Man movies, Spider-Man 3 included. Hell of a lot better than Iron Man 3. Probably a little bit better than Iron Man 2. Certainly not better than any of the Avengers movies, in my opinion, or the Guardians movies. Maybe it's better than Thor 2. I don't know. It's about right there with it. It's not as good as the first Thor or the third, or any of the Captain America movies, because they're all great. But, that's kind of where I stand with it. Not the best, but not the worst. Definitely enjoyable. Would I see it again? Absolutely. Glad I didn't have to pay full price for IMAX, because fuck, that's expensive. I mean, I pay $20 a month for AMC A-List, and to pay $20 a month, I got 14 of that back tonight, not to mention the fact that I get a comic book with it. I get all the popcorn rewards, all of that other shit. So, Definitely a great experience tonight. Glad I saw Venom. I was getting a little nervous because of the Rotten Tomatoes scores, but they're not always right. You know, they shit on the DC movies, and I was fine with those too. They weren't the best, they weren't the worst. It's kind of the same type of deal here. So